then we will be good to go for an interesting discussion. And I will actually kick off with a question that I was thinking of, and it might be sort of the obvious question for a session like this, but and it's actually addressed to all of you. So then you can fight on who to start. But how do you see the connection and the potential between industrialized construction methods, and keep in mind both the product aspect and the production manufacturing aspect of it? So the connection and potential between that and the needed acceleration of sustainability efforts, because we are in a hurry. The planet is suffering. We need to act. So how do you see the connection between industrialized construction and sustainability? So who wants to go first?
I'm happy to jump in with just a couple of thoughts, and I'm sure the other panelists will have better, smarter, additional thoughts. But a couple of key parts of your question. One part, which may seem like the simpler part, is the more we can have a systems approach, the less waste we'll have, the less materials we need to use. It also translates into less carbon created through transportation, through having more offsite construction. And so that's a big part of it. But then another important part that I find really interesting, especially in the work that we're doing with Google, but I know other companies are doing as well, is companies who have enough scale to then use that scale and use that pipeline to unlock things that actually can translate to more sustainable approaches, whether that be healthy materials or more healthy air quality kinds of systems. For example, the R&D team at Google are working on prefabricated versions for MEP that could help give us that air quality, have repetition within those things that had not previously had repetition, because for the MEP systems, every single client has a totally different design for every single building. And so having the ability for developers, for building owners to come together to say, you know what, like we have commonalities actually for our needs, and what are the additional things that we can say, hey, we're going to standardize these things in order to actually help achieve greater outcomes in terms of sustainable energy, water, health, etc.
Jonas here from BookLook. I would like to build on that, because I also believe that scalability is the only way forward. And I think scalability, and connect that with sort of industrialized, whatever we mean with that. Either it's your 9 areas, Jerker, or maybe even some other areas. But scalability is, as I see it, the only way for this industry to sort of get out from the dark ages where we invent everything in every single project. And when we continue to do that, we will never attract other industries to partner up to actually do what we need to do. So scalability and industrialization together, that's the key for everything.
I might jump in and add.
Go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, that I think to scale though, we need people. We need, and if we're talking about 2.5 million units in the next how many years? 4 years in California, without a scaled solution that is industrialized, there's no other way to have one-offs to get 2.5 million new units in California, or whatever the 5 million new units in the United States that is necessary to meet that demand.
But is there to draw a little on that, is there a risk then, because we are so overwhelmed by the need to build more and more and more? I mean, my thoughts are thrown back to the 60s, where we did a lot of build. We had high numbers in produced units, but I would say sustainability aspects weren't really taken into account. Is there a risk that we are doing the same mistakes again, or how do you see that we can really take what we know now about the opportunities about the industrialization, but also what we know about sustainability? We need to get them to work together. So is there a risk that we tend to forget about maybe the most important question?
There's always the question about we will always know more tomorrow than we do today. So and if you look at life that way, it's always better to wait until tomorrow to make up a decision. So I think yeah, we did some mistakes, and now you're referring to the Nordics, where Jerker, and we will most likely do other mistakes this time. But let us not sort of we shouldn't be afraid. The last percent when you're talking about 80% of everything built we need is already built. I think that was a lovely approach on looking at things, because how can we utilize that in a better way? So please, we shouldn't. Yeah, we will continue to do mistakes, but don't make that not try to do anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd also add, on top of the fact that yes, we made mistakes in the past, but those buildings are still there, and we can see in what ways we can curb and edit what we've done before. And yes, there is a huge pressing need, but I think at the same time that need is still not being met. So it's not necessarily that we're building massive amounts of housing and we're building them unsustainably. It's that we've reached a point in our urban landscapes, in the labor market, where it's so expensive to build that the housing is not being built anyways. And for me, industrialized construction is that perfect mix of efficiency and scalability. If you're thinking through componentizing, creating products upstream, then you're necessarily, both cutting down on waste throughout the actual production process, but also hopefully simplifying and creating greater accessibility for more affordable housing.
I'll add one more thought to this, which is we can't forget that part of the definition of sustainability is that it has to be for all. And right now we're at a serious demerit to a lot of people that don't have access to healthy workplaces or healthy living. And so I would say that the first objective is that we have to solve that. We're not truly a sustainable sort of ecology, and as we define ourselves as humans, if every human doesn't have access to that just to begin with, and we obviously have to do that in a way that doesn't endanger future generations' ability to do the same. And that this is the big sort of divide that we have to breach. I would say one of the biggest, and I'm speaking very specifically about the US and not the Nordics now, but one of the biggest missing parties at the table today in the US, as opposed to the 60s, which you mentioned, where we built a lot, is the government as a fundamental sort of balancing agent in a private sector market. The private sector will build what it needs to build when it can build it, and unfortunately, that can't be the only tool. There needs to be a public sector as builder as well, to address a lot of these issues. And part of that, significant part of that in the West, is adaptive reuse, is taking over and refactoring parts of cities and districts and buildings that need to sort of enable more land or more buildings, and put them up for really good technical solutions that can solve some of these issues in the near term.
Yeah, thanks. We actually had one specific question for you, Michelle, and since I know you need to leave fairly soon, I think I will address the question to you, and I'm reading here. With a strong mandate and vision from Google's top leaders, what's the biggest bottleneck in achieving this vision and mandate? Is it, as Federico pointed out, is it policies, legislation, lack of skills, or not enough data, or what is it?
Such a good question. It's the critical question that I and my team ask every day. I would put it into, generally speaking, 3 buckets. One is the policy and regulation bucket. So for example, we're now doing entire buildings out of mass timber. Mass timber as a construction material can allow us to save on carbon, save on cost, and have a better user experience, but it's not approved as a system in a number of areas, including when we started it in California. This is where our leadership support of, if we find things that we know are going to be good solutions for these aspects of sustainability and scalable, healthy buildings, they'll support us taking the time it takes to help change policy where we can, when we know that it's the right thing to do for the industry as a whole. Because to do that just on a single project would be almost impossible. The second category is this interesting one that is about a supply chain, and it's kind of a chicken and the egg situation, where in order for us to really support a number of these more innovative techniques, we also need to be able to demonstrate to our leadership that yes, it can actually get to a scale that can have a cost that actually could make it available to everybody. But it's hard to actually get to that lower cost until you actually have demonstrated the scale. And so it is this chicken and the egg situation that I know a lot of individual companies struggle with. And it's certainly a challenge that I struggled with when I worked in prefab single family homes. This is also something where I really appreciate our leadership support, because it's something where if we can show, and we've studied it and researched it enough, and we can show enough data that, hey, if we do this project with this kind of system or this kind of innovation, that after the first project or second project, it will lead to cost savings, then they can help support that. And so it's also having a company where we have multiple projects and we can look across an entire portfolio, that it doesn't have to weigh down one single project, because it's tough for one project to say, oh, great, we're going to do a thing, even though it's more expensive. That's just not a win and just hard to do. And then the third category is, I would put it under risk and how the industry in different parts of the ecosystem mitigate risk, whether that be the designers, the engineers, the contractor, the building owner. And with newer systems, there's always risk. And that is hard to shift that and shift, like saying, okay, general contractor, like we want you to use these innovative systems, and they are not incented to do things that are new. They're incented to reduce their risk in order to maximize their profit through predictability. So this is why, and I didn't actually get to this in my talk, but a big part of our work that we're doing now with R&D Lab is actually setting up a kit of parts system along with digital tools where we've pre-vetted things with suppliers in order to actually have MOUs with those, so we can reduce the risk. And then as the building owner, not necessarily mandate that our general contractors and designers and engineers use them, but we're in a position to say, okay, here are solutions. If you have something better, great, do those. But we've actually found a way to be able to address this. So it's shifting some of those levers where we have that possibility. But it takes a little time, which is why we're not there yet, but we're definitely on our way.
Yeah, exactly. No, of course it takes time, but that's not a good reason to wait. So we have to do something. And drawing on a little on what you said, Jonas, it's of course we see a lot of problems. That's not a good reason to just wait and see. So we have to start doing with the best of our knowledge, of course, and take into account as much as we know and have learned from other initiatives. So, but I want to also go back, maybe take one step back and hear your thoughts on, because of course we all know that we need to go into deeper sustainability or better solutions, processes and so on from a sustainability perspective. But you, as with your different perspectives, what's the main driver? I mean, besides of saving the world, that we sort of theoretically understand that we need to do, but what's the main driver behind your different initiatives that has a lot of sort of sustainability aspects in it? Can you say a couple of words about that? You come from different views. I think there is interesting thoughts around that.
I'll start since I need to jump.
Yeah, that's right.
Other answers. For Google, it starts actually with the user experience first, and that sustainability is actually a critical part to that user experience. And so the user experience starts with both the people who work at Google, but also our communities and our neighbors, and creating healthy environments where people thrive, creating environments where we know that we can have resiliency and business resiliency, where people can do their best work, and being a good neighbor. But it's always linked back to that user experience as how we identify what our priorities, because we know within sustainability, there's like a huge, big bucket of what that can mean. And that's one of the main levers that we use for prioritizing.
Thanks. And the others, is it like customer demands, or is it legislation, or is it like owners that are pushing you in the right direction? Or Felix, you had any thoughts?
I can jump in. I mean, for us, this journey started by I was living in Ethiopia in 2012 for 1.5 years, and then moved from Ethiopia to Singapore to do. I was teaching architecture in Ethiopia, and then was doing research in Singapore. And this dramatic shift of how do people have access to materials to build with, kind of triggered a lot of thoughts on resource access, resource inequalities. And so the question of circularity in material flows, I think it can be tied back to many of these experiences. Not only is a material available on the market, but also who is responsible for getting it there. I mean, the whole value chain of resource extraction that is so bad, not only for the environment, but also for our social system at the moment. And all the solutions that, of course, circulating these materials can bring to this question of addressing the built environment. So I think that was the main driver in 2012, 13, 14 when we started on this journey. And of course, since then, kind of built up different aspects of the circular economy into that, because it's not only about the material loop. I mean, there's many other aspects that come into it, but it started with that driver, I think, for us.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Jonas, do you want to share some thoughts on why BoKlok is moving pretty consequently sort of towards climate neutrality?
Yeah, and you could of course say we are a commercial player, even though that we are targeting customers that a few other players are focusing on. And at the end of the day, it's easy to say this is customer driven. Honestly, it has not been that yet, because our customers, they are in a position where they do not really afford to spend a lot of more money on being really sort of doing good for the planet. So for us, it's a matter of actually being ahead of the customers, and really it's Federico, you talked about, and I agree with you about the sort of the social dimension of this. You can connect the social dimension very tightly with the sort of environmental direction. For us to be really to be proud as an actor for our employees, who is also a part of the society, we need to have a higher purpose. And which higher purpose could be better than actually contribute to the sort of the development of this planet we're all sort of sharing. So it goes very well hand in hand. Having been since the birth of this idea named Bukluk, talking to sort of aiming at people with thinner wallets, how can we make their lives as good as ever possible? Sort of sustainability in a broad sense, where climate is arising as a very, very crucial part of that, is for our brand. It's critical. If we don't go down that road and really want to go down that road, we will kill our brand.
Mm. And in when we all of us, I think I speak for many of us, and also in the audience, we who are inspired by industrialized construction. Many of us have drawn a lot of inspiration from other industries, not least the automotive industry. And what we have seen there, to me, it's been very interesting to see the last five. I'd say the last 5 years, there's been a huge shift towards, if we at least call it sustainability. And now, to me, it's a very, very strong customer demand for higher and or better sustainability. Do you see that coming also in our industry, even though it's not that strong? The voice of the customer today about this is not that strong, but maybe other stakeholders are more louder, like authorities and so on. Do you see that also the sort of end customers are going to demand it, give it maybe a couple of more years? What do you say? Maybe some of you students, Armel, slightly younger than some of us. What do you think around these aspects?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. You know, thinking about specific demands and how that connects to sustainability. I think for us, looking at where KitSwitch started, it was really taking into account different pain points and trying to draw a line between them. And so it was at the start of the pandemic, we kept reading about the fact that you know, a lot of retail commercial properties weren't being used as intended in a country like the US that's already over retailed, and where commercial has been kind of on the decline. And as well, in parallel, reading about a lot of people who were facing evictions with the rent moratorium and affordable housing. And so in that sense, trying to create initiatives that comprehend different dimensions of demand. And I think it's a key point of sustainability and circularity as well, is taking, you know, pain points and connecting them in sorts of win-win situations for a process that strives to not only minimize harm, but also kind of repair and do better. Do you feel, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I was also thinking of you, Shanti, working from the sort of authorities perspective, maybe not representing, well, in a way you could say maybe that authorities should be sort of the collective voice of the end customers, or yeah. If they don't sort of formulate these kinds of demands themselves, then the authorities needs to do it for them.
Yep.
Can you give some perspective on that? Is that a driver
Absolutely.
in your organization, or?
Yeah, and the way we think about it in the buildings industry, right, are energy codes, right? And so we've seen significant efforts in cities and states to ratchet down or increase the stringency of energy codes across the United States. So California, net zero energy is required for single family, and will be required for for larger buildings by 2030. Cities in Colorado here already have net zero codes in the development, and so they're you know, it's not just the leaders that want to do this because it's the right thing to do. It's these cities that have mayors that have made commitments to 100% renewables. Or states that have 100% renewable commitments, or utilities now even having 100% renewable commitments. And as those commitments become policies and codes, that's how it influences all of us. And so, the concern from my perspective and the research that we do is how to make sure those upcoming codes can be met as cost effectively as possible. And so that's where I see the cost and productivity intersecting with these aspirational codes, stretch codes, if you will, that are being proposed across the US.
Yeah, thanks. I have seen we have, I think, a lot of different questions rolling in the chat or in the Q&A. So actually, I want to check with you, Juliana. You've kept an eye on the Q&A. Is there any questions that I know there are questions, but is anyone that stands out or that you want to raise here?
Yeah, we have a lot of really great questions. Hopefully we can get through some of them. One from Mohammed Raskanari about information systems for a circular economy is what information must be recorded during the design phase to enable reusability at the end of life? And how do we deal with differences in material and product characteristics, such as different lifespan? And is there a need for a system in order to record this information and improve communication for circularity?
I can take a stab at that, and I'm sure others have something to add. Yes, of course, there are systems in development. Material passports and building passports aim to do exactly that, to document basically which material is where in the built environment. And ideally, it should include information such as how is it connected, where can I find it, what material is it, specifications. And what will become increasingly important is to document how this material has been treated over time. So it's not just the moment of installation, but of course with a structural beam, for example, we would need to know, has it been in a fire, has there been an earthquake, etc., etc. Anything that can change the material specifications needs to be documented. And so this is not just kind of a one-time a data point, but this is an archive of what happens to our materials and buildings over time, to then allow these materials to be reused and recycled. And that's then the next question, right? How do you access this material, this data? A big question, who can see this data? So there's a lot of open questions that haven't been answered yet around building passports. But yeah, it's a big research field that we're all working on right now.
Yeah, I'll jump into that, since part of what we're building on our platform is exactly this. I'd say it also requires a little bit of a different approach. You know, with modularity, you have sort of volumetric systems, you have panelized systems, and then you obviously have componentry. All of these are sort of different scales of modularity. For us, we're really focused on volumetric systems, specifically because when we say, okay, we're going to deploy an adaptable workplace, we don't specify, a stud wall and sheetrock and a drop ceiling. We specify a whole conference room, which comes in as a product. So this idea of, say, for example, a column that like jabs through the middle of a conference room simply does not exist in the environments that we deploy, because the conference room is an insular product. And so we track that whole thing as an entity. And so our SKU tracking is as big as possible. We all, I think, know that tracking materials at the building level is really hard, and to understand all of the everything that has to do with use and all of that is a really almost impossible task. I don't want to say impossible, but it's a really difficult task. And so we have decided to look at the world as effectively core and shell, sort of hard-coded, and then everything on interiors really should be the software that can change and adapt over time. And so we sort of take this position that deploying traditional construction methodologies into adaptive reuse of interior systems, or anything that can't float, is really a poor really tends to be a poor tactic unless you know for a fact that that environment can and should be there for at least 30 to 50 years. So if you know it's going to change, which in the world of commercial real estate we do, retail changes every 3 to 5, workplace changes every 3 to 4. We know that deploying a product that's designed to last 20 years, we know we're going to demolish it 3 to 5 years from now, is just fundamentally sort of like, it's almost unethical. And so we say, okay, let's deploy these boxes for conference rooms and phone booths and whatever. And we track things in the way we track furniture. We productize as much as we possibly can, because supply chain at the small scale is still not easy, but much more attainable than supply chain at the material level. So we have to, we think about productization in that way.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for all these perspectives. Juliana, any other questions maybe that you find in the Q&A?
Yeah, there's a lot. Another we had to do with innovation in the business models presented today. So could the presenters expand on how IC opens the possibilities for new business models and what the spaces are for innovation currently?
That's a big question. We could have a whole day of discussions around that. We have a couple of more minutes, so if you have any silver bullet sort of answers on that I think would be very appreciated. No, but kidding a little, but some short answers about this would be super interesting.
I think, Felix, you mentioned a few nice examples on carpets rented and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's like a small thing, but still, it's a very sort of, I think that's an interesting route forward.
I think the gist of that would be, the circular economy, it requires us to develop new products or components, right? And so the fact that we then end up with something that can be recycled doesn't necessarily mean that it will be recycled, and the economic model that is attached to that should be that key, right? And so in the carpet example, for example, of course started from the fact that the company realized that this product, now that it is recyclable, is an asset for the company in their business model for the future. And so there's it makes economic sense to retain the asset within the company's ownership. And that changed the business model. So now we're renting this because in 8 years that carpet comes back and I can plan with that resource and bring it back into my production cycle. And so I have less volatility to resource markets. I know the price of that, I can plan into the future. And so the fact that started with a simple, I design a new product, changed the whole business model that's attached to that. The fact that this has been around for 8, 9, 10 years also shows how difficult it is in the built environment to implement these business models. Because we're still talking about a carpet and a lighting system in Schiphol Airport. These are examples that have been around for 8 years, and there's nothing big coming up that is scalable, that is already like on the market in that level. At least I'm not aware of it, and I would be very happy for examples on that. There are some examples here in the panel that maybe go there. But yeah, it is a very difficult shift to make, but I think a fundamental one that we are all working towards.
It's difficult, of course, but that's also why we gather like this, like today, to share thoughts and spark innovation. And maybe, who knows, some of our attendees or some of you guys might get a good idea from out of this, and that will be a little piece of acceleration. Who knows? That's at least the hope. Let's see. I am trying to keep track of time. Actually, I think we could maybe end the session and the discussion on, if you have, because you have now at the moment you have 272 attendees. I think many of them are industrialized construction enthusiasts. So if you have any any good advice on how to not only focus on robots or 3D printing or cool software, but the bigger picture, and not least the sustainability aspect of it? If you have any piece of advice of that or something else. Should we start with Shanti? Do you want to kick it off? Something short.
Yeah, maybe there's a question about who's the leader worldwide as well, right? I think the US is definitely trying to catch up for sure. I think a lot of the big GC firms in the United States all see the lack of productivity historically and are trying to catch up. So there is, I think, internal to large construction companies, this conversation is happening. And so we're starting to see, I think, the US respond to the opportunity and to meet the needs. So look forward to seeing more of that.
Thanks. Jonas, do you have any, you've been in the business for a long time. Do you have any good advice?
You said it yourself. We are a lot of industrial construction enthusiasts gathered. But please let us not just be enthusiastic about that. It's about our greater purpose. What are we contributing to society? And all the things we're talking about today, those are means to really, really get it right.
That's a good point. Thanks. Federico.
I think the main recommendation is we have to stop waiting for people to sort of ask us for things. I think do what KitSwitch did. Go out and start a company. Take matters into your own hands and build the type of company you want to work at. It doesn't exist. This idea that the market is going to, like, all of a sudden one day wake up and ask for these. We create these things. If you buy shoes, they're not coming to you and asking you how those shoes should be made. Like they use it obviously as a way to market specific types of shoes to you, but like it just should be the way in which we practice and build and do things. And like if this group is the group of experts, then this group should be the decision makers, period. Go start a company, go work at the companies that you look up to. And I think, or go work in the government sector and push to, procure from these types of companies as well. That's how we make change.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Felix?
Yeah, maybe building on that. I mean, it's not only that 80% of the buildings till 2050 are already built. I think it's also good to know that maybe 95% of buildings are not built by architects. And so, I mean, there is the significant amount of the built environment has different drivers. And so I think for us, it's important to know that we're changing the paradigm and necessarily it's not about the tool or the equipment, but it's about how do we connect things and how are they returned to a cycle. And so I think it's important to keep that bigger picture in the discussion.
Thanks, Felix. And Armel, final little piece of advice.
I think I'd say to not shy away from the complexity. The construction industry and building safe and sustainable buildings for humans is a very complicated and just complicated task. And I think a lot of the issues that we'll be facing as a society generally are ones of systems and are complex. And so, which leads me to say that I think to tackle them, coalition building and working together and engaging different people, because while vertical integration is super important, there's no entity that can do it all for the entire planet. And so I think keeping those two things in mind going forward would be my piece of advice.
Thanks a lot. A lot of wisdom, I think, we have gathered today. So thanks a lot to you, the panel, and for your talks and for sharing. That's why we're here, to share ideas, as I said. So thanks a lot for that.